look at the quantitative reasoning section of the UCAT exam. So let's just start with what it's about. So the quantitative reasoning is there for you to use your mathematical and numerical and analytical skills to interpret a bit of data that they give you, and then to answer a few questions based on that. So thinking about why we need this as future clinicians, as future doctors, it's because doctors have to look at data and interpret it regularly every single day. And it can be in many different forms, one of which is numerical. So if I give you one simple example, interpreting a BMI graph or a peak flow graph, that requires you to sort of understand what each of the axes show, interpret the data, and then apply it to each individual patient. So this is just one simple example of where quantitative reasoning is used by doctors in their daily lives. So now going on to the UCAT exam itself. So looking at the format of the quantitative reasoning exam, it involves 36 questions that you have to answer within 24 minutes. Now, all of the 36 questions are not independent questions, but rather they're often in groups, so 4 of them might be based on one data set. So essentially you interpret the same data set to answer all 4 questions. And there are many groups of these types of questions that build up to 36, although there may be some independent questions as well. So I think whatever strategy you build up, just bear this format in mind. So if you look at the timing, that comes down to about 40 seconds per question. And we'll look at a few of the strategies of how you'd use this time to your advantage later on. So now looking at what sort of content you need to know before going into the exam. And this is going to be based on a lot of the things that you learn in GCSE maths. So I think one way to think about it is in 2 main groups. So one of them would be statistics, which is includes probability, ratios, percentages, and I consider estimation as one of the key ones as well, which I'll come on to later. And another thing to learn and focus on are tables and graphs and just different data presentation techniques. So just review the different sorts of graphs and charts that you've done in your GCSE. One thing I would suggest is that it's easy to think that, yeah, I've done this before, so I'm familiar with all of it already, so I don't need to review the GCSE content again. But I think just going back to the basics one more time, just going through a few past paper questions, just to make sure your methods in approaching each of these are correct, is worthwhile doing before you start practicing for your UCAT exam questions. We'll do a few questions in a bit, but these are just the main areas to focus on, and then you'll pick up more areas that you think you need to focus on while you do practice papers as well. One of the concerns that students often have while preparing for this section is that if maths is not your strong point, you'd immediately assume that the section wouldn't be your strong point either. But I think that might be a misconception because of the content that it focuses on. So while we think of maths as a lot of calculus and integration and all sorts of different complex mathematical formulae, this UCAT exam focuses more on the statistical bit, and it also includes a lot of basic arithmetic and mental maths. These are essential for you to be able to apply the knowledge that you know onto real-world examples, instead of just using theoretical formulaic aspects of abstract maths. So that's one thing to bear in mind, and this makes it different from your exams that you do at school, because while they might have a heavier content, this is more focused on application and how you interpret the data instead. Alright, so let's go ahead with a few practice questions now. This practice question is freely available on the UCAT website, and we'll just look at one of the approaches in which you can try to solve this question step by step. So, having a quick glance at this question, it appears to be quite long with a table, and there's quite a lot of things going on here. So at this point, I'd read the first line of information given, which will give us a summary of what the table is about, and then I'd go and read the question so that we know exactly what pieces of information we're looking to pick out from the table. So feel free to just pause at this point and have a read of the question. Okay, so clearly this is a multi-step question that can probably be solved in many different ways, but as long as you get to the answer eventually in the way that fits and works well with you, you should be fine. So what I think is one of the easiest way to solve it is to first work out the fuel consumption in each of the cars and then to calculate the difference between them. So now to calculate the fuel usage, we first need to work out what the distance is. And from that, we can work out what the fuel consumption is. So this is how you can calculate what the distance traveled over the whole term is. So key pieces of information we're looking at are in this bit here. So it says that each term is 12 weeks long and the children are taken to and from school, and it says that the round trip is 25 kilometers. So that's why we have 25 kilometers for the round trip multiplied by 2 because it's to and from, and the 5 weekdays in a week, and it's a 12-week term. So that gives us 3,000 kilometers. The grey bit at the bottom is just a simpler way that I use to work it out mentally. So after this, we'll next try to work out what the fuel consumption is for each of the cars. So now if you see here, I've used this piece of information here for the petrol engine and this piece of information here for the diesel engine and put them in using the distance traveled and worked out how much fuel is being consumed. So for the petrol, we know that there's 10.3 liters being consumed for every 100 kilometers traveled, and we have to work out how many liters are used for 3,000 kilometers traveled. So I've just set it up as an equation, and it comes out to x equals to 309 liters. And after using the same method for the diesel engine, it comes up to 291 liters. And then the difference is simply what you get when you subtract one from the other, and that matches the answer quite easily, which is 18 liters. So this is just one of the ways in which you can solve this question, but the way that the UCAT have given as a way to solve the question is actually quite different from the approach I take. So the point I'm trying to make here is that different methods will work well for different people. So just try to find your way and just try to stay calm and use whichever pieces of information you think are necessary to work out the answer. And just have a look for the details as well in the question. So for example, let's say if you missed the section that said to and from school each day, you'd forget to multiply it by 2 and you'd probably get 9 liters as your answer. So often the mistakes that you can make are by missing out the details in the question. Alright, and another thing to note is that this question, although they gave us this massive table here, the only relevant piece of information was in the first row here. So just bear in mind that even though you may be given a lot of information, not all of it may be relevant. So just make up the decision in your mind what you think is necessary for you to answer the question and stick to that and follow what you think would make sense for the question without being confused by the overwhelming amount of information given. So I hope that was helpful. This was just going over one question. We'll go over a couple of more questions. Okay, now let's have a look at another practice question that requires us to interpret a graph and answer a question based on that. This is very relevant to some things you have to do as a future clinician because there'll be many pieces of data to interpret, especially in the forms of graphs. So the way to approach this for me would be to first read the introductory bit at the top that just describes what the graph is about, and then to move on to the question itself without seeing what the graph is in too much detail. And then after reading the question, you can go back and have a look at which pieces of information you need from the graph itself. So at this point, it might be good for you to just pause the video and try and read the question and just think about ways in which you could approach it. Alright, so one of the key things in the question is that it asks for a rate of increase of the median between two separate time periods. And as soon as you see any rate, it should trigger in your mind that you're looking for the change in a variable in relation to another measure of time. So for this one, you can see in all the answer options, it's in relation to months. And then when you go back to the graph, you see that the x-axis is also to do with the months. So essentially, this is asking for the change in height over a specific period of time in relation to how it changes over the time period in months. So now what we need to see is which time period it's in. So it says between birth and 1 year old. So now this you have to translate to the fact that it means between 0 months and 12 months. And that's these 2 points here, these 2 blue points here. So now if we just read off the y values, then we get the values of 50 centimeters at birth and 76 centimeters at 12 months. And then, as they've shown here quite clearly, you divide it up by 12 and that gives you the average change in height over months. So this is how you'd use a graph to solve a question that requires you to interpret a fair bit of data. One thing to note here is that UCAT questions often require you to go a step further than just reading off a graph. So here you've had to take information off the graph and apply your own knowledge to it and make it into something more useful, such as calculating a rate. So I hope this was helpful. Let's get back to learning more about what the UCAT exam involves. So now let's go through a few tips and tricks that will help you in this section of the UCAT exam. So one of the things that you can use for the exam is an online calculator that's on the platform. It'll just be on your screen and you can click to open it up. So the way you can use it is either you can type the numbers in, so make sure to put on the numlock function for that so that you can easily enter the numbers, and this is much faster than you having to click each of the numbers on the screen. So yeah, this is just one of the things to bear in mind, just to speed you up that one little bit. But another thing to consider is that to use the calculator only if you think it's absolutely necessary. So the main reason for this being that it does slow you down. So when you do practice, you'll notice that if you try to do something through a mental arithmetic side and just estimate, that's often faster than you having to click each of the individual numbers and work it out on the screen during the exam. So just try to think about, do I actually need to use the calculator for this question, for this specific bit of the question, and then use it instead of just like immediately rushing to the calculator as soon as you see an arithmetic problem to be solved. So if we have a look at this example to illustrate that point, just take a few moments to first read the question and then go back to the table and have a think about what exactly the question is asking for. So just pause the video now and then do that and then come back. Alright, so we see that the question is asking us to look for two different things. So first we have to look at the urban population, and we have to find the instance where there's been a least percentage increase in this population. So now we can eyeball it and work it out. So between first and second year, it's pretty much doubled, and we can see the same between year 2 and year 3. And then between year 3 and year 4, we can see the increase is a lot less in terms of its percentage. So these are the years we're looking for the difference in between. And then after working out which percentage increase is the lowest in urban areas, we have to figure the same out for the rural population. So then we have to go to these two pieces of information. And then, as they've shown here, you can divide one by the other and work out what the percentage is. The thing you can consider here is that you could probably work out that it's 1.45% without actually using a calculator and finding this value. Because if you try to just divide 3,400 by 3,300, it's a lot smaller than any of these values here. So by process of elimination, you should really be able to figure out that the answer is A without needing to use the calculator that they've provided. And because the section can be time pressured for different people at different points, it is beneficial to see occasions where you can get away without using your calculator. So this is just something to bear in mind. But let's say if you are confused, just go with the methods that you have learned and use your calculator as you would. But yes, this is for you to adapt your methods and just to be aware that at some points you might not necessarily need to use the calculator. So I hope this helps, and let's get back to learning more about the different parts of the UCAT exam. Okay, so now let's have a look at time management in this section. So this section, I'd say, is very time pressured, especially because you have to read a lot of data. Often you have to interpret a lot of it to answer each of the questions, and the questions themselves can present some data you need to understand before you can apply it. So bearing that in mind, you have approximately 40 seconds to answer each question, and whether or not you choose to spend that much time on each one or more or less depends on what strategy you go into the exam with. So now I think you should think about whether this section itself is a strength or a weakness for you. So if you're very confident that quantitative reasoning works well for you, that time pressure works well for you, 40 seconds is enough time for you, then that's good, and make sure you maintain that time and keep going at it consistently. But if you think that 40 seconds is not enough time for you to answer the questions that you see, and that it would be good to have more time just to make sure you answer each of the questions correctly, it might be worthwhile considering a different strategy. So some things that people have considered is to try to go into the exam thinking that, okay, maybe I can't finish all of the questions, but make sure to spend sufficient time on the questions you think you can answer to make sure that at least those ones are correct. The reason for this is that often a lot of the marks rely on the details in the questions. So if you miss those, you might find it trickier to reach the right answer from the information you've gathered in your head. So that's why it might be a good idea to spend a bit longer on a fewer of the questions, but make sure that you get those questions correct. Another thing to consider learning before going into the exam are conversions between different units of measurements. So for example, between miles and kilometers and other measurements like these. Last thing to bear in mind after you've looked through all the resources we've provided, as well as online resources, and most importantly the UCAT website on their advice, make sure to practice as much as you can. Practice is how you'll improve your own technique and know what you need to do on the day of the exam as well. Thanks everyone for watching this section about the quantitative reasoning bit for preparing for your UCAT exam. Have a look at the box below for more resources for your UCAT preparation, as well as the We Are Medics UCAT ebook. Hope this was helpful. Thanks guys.